This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast coming in Monday morning. It's October 9th, and we have actual basketball games to discuss. Well, kind of actual basketball games. The Wolves played two
Fake
preseason
basketball
games.
games.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two preseason games in Abu Dhabi against the Dallas Mavericks over the weekend, or Thursday and Saturday. The Wolves won both of them. Chris, that means the Wolves are the San Francisco 49ers of the NBA preseason.
Just a juggernaut right now.
Just a juggernaut. Chris Hine noted.
Kyle texted me last night and said, "What's your favorite Marriott property in Las Vegas?" Just asking for Super Bowl recommendations. Like, book it now. Let's go. Let's get it.
You probably need to, because remember when we were down there for Summer League and all that F1 stuff was going on. The Super Bowl down there.
Yeah.
You're not going.
It's going to be crazy. I don't even want to know what tickets are going to go for whatever. That's going to be stupid, insane.
But your Niners might be going.
It might be going. We'll see.
So the Wolves win both the games, and as I was waking up this morning on Monday morning to think about, what do I want to talk about from this game, and I think the main thing I keep going back to thinking about both of the games was just this idea that the Wolves were like effectively big. And Kyle and I kind of talked about that after the first game, where I asked him, I was like, how many games do you think last season you left being like, man, the Wolves won that game because of their size? And Kyle was like 3. I was like, okay, it was probably a little bit more than 3, but but
yeah.
it was probably single digits, Chris, right?
It was, and they were all late in the season, I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these two games, preseason, Dallas plays small. The center they're starting as a rookie. All those caveats. That effectively big and imposing the big will thing happened in this, and it felt in very much ways similar to right before Nas got hurt. To your point, where it's like, oh yeah, this kind of does make sense. We're going 48 minutes of staying big the whole time, and the opponent seems to kind of be having an issue with that. Am I right to say that this, just from the whole Abu Dhabi thing, that's the biggest takeaway is the size and it kind of feeling like it worked?
It didn't seem to hinder them at all on either end of the floor or in any facet of the game. I mean, it's early and Dallas is still playing itself into shape. But I will say, I just think compared to where they were a year ago at this time, this team is so much farther along, it feels like, just from these two performances. You think back to last year where Carl and Rudy barely practiced together during that training camp. And yeah, they didn't play much during the regular season. But I do think, to your point, that little window of that West Coast trip that they had where they played really well, and that window of time where Carl came back, Nas was still playing, and they seemed to really hit their peak moment of that season before the injuries got in the way. That is kind of what this has looked like through 2 games. It did remind me a lot of that. And, one of the big questions when they made the trade was, how is this going to work on defense with Carl playing the 4? I don't think it's made that much of a difference. And I think you saw last year that they are able to play pretty well defensively with Carl at the 4, with Rudy out there, with Jaden out there. And now you're going to incorporate, Nikhil into that as kind of this 6th or 7th man. So, yeah, it reminds me a lot of that. And I think, last year we kind of thought that this team would – playoffs are a different beast, matchups, everything like that. But we always thought last year that this team just has so much talent on it that it will win a decent number of regular season games. And last year we saw that wasn't true because they still had to figure a lot of things out. But I feel like this year they're kind of set up for that runway of, okay, they can hit the regular season, they can hit the ground running and maybe get off to a strong start, start stacking some wins and maybe get some good seeding in the Western Conference ahead of some of these other teams who might need some time to come together. Guys, stars who are
like the Wolves did last year.
60 games, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think they're set up much better for that scenario this season than they were a year ago.
Yeah, and I would say, like, we have to remember that they can be more set up for that and still extremely imperfect, right?
Correct.
Like,
yes,
there's almost assuredly in the first 3-4 weeks of games, there's going to be like a palm to your face game, kind of like that. I remember the Spurs game sticks out from the beginning of the
Right.
season last year, where it was like the opponent and it was a bad opponent and they exposed your weaknesses. Like that is going to happen at some point, or maybe a quarter or a couple quarters here and there. But even if and when that happens, if the baseline and foundation of what and how the Wolves want to play, not only exclusively tied to like how many bigs are on the floor and who's doing all this and that, just the overall foundation is better, you can have, a handful of really bad quarters or even lose a bad game here or there and still be a mile ahead of where you are, because there are going to be those other teams that have new rosters. The Phoenixes, obviously in the East, now we have a whole bunch of churn going on with the rosters. And I just think that it's good to have some of this foundation here. You have a better idea, it seems to me, of how they want to start possessions, just how you want to shape your offense, who you want Cat to be playing with, who you want Rudy to be playing with, how you get to that from a rotation standpoint. When I'm just like going back, I went back and watched the first quarter offensive possessions from the second game this morning. And it's like, that doesn't look like a team that is like, quote unquote, figuring itself out. Yes, it's preseason, and there was stuff, and there was like a bad ant lob to Rudy or whatever. But if you could just go, it's funny when you were talking about the beginning of last season and preseason. I remember being in Vegas, which I think was Rudy's first game he played after coming back, and like the offensive possessions were like Rudy sealing the post, like both hands up, like. My basketball coach, this is a deep dive. My basketball coach back in the day called that Doliaking. You remember Michael Doliak? Like huge
There's a
white
blast
guy.
from the past.
It's like, and I remember sitting there at that game and I'm like, what? This is what they're trying to run offensively, is just like deep seal Rudy post-ups. In this game, it was movement. There was the structure, there was the flow, and it was quicker and more decisive into it. And if nothing else, I think that's the coaches learning what they want to do, but also just kind of like every one of the players substantially more comfortable with like what the idea is of their role, knowing it's going to be figured out over time.
Yeah.
But that's from preseason to preseason, I think a pretty big distinction to be made.
They just have so much more institutional knowledge of what works, what doesn't, where to put people. Like you said, I think one of the encouraging things, at least, I thought when the starting unit was on the floor, even though they may have been running the same action over and over again, like whether it was that too big action at the top or just kind of a Carl, I think in game 2, it was like a Carl screen at the top, and then Rudy was screening off to the side. I mean, they were running it almost every possession down, but it was like, you're running the same action, but it did get them into, I thought,
it was like boom, boom, boom.
Right. It's like, we know what we're doing. This is what we're doing the first pass of the possession, and then we just kind of go from there. I thought that was, that seemed to work really well in terms of just getting everybody moving, getting everybody on the same page. And it looked smooth. It didn't look clunky. And again, defensively, I thought everything looked really well. And really, as we were saying, it's like there's not much to like really pick. In these first couple of games here, I thought everything it looked as you would want it to look if you're a Wolves fan at this point of the season.
And you had Ant back in the mix for the second. Probably part of the reason why we're focusing on the bigs, right, is that Ant doesn't play in the first game, kind of resting the ankle. Jaden rests the second game. I don't think anything to be worried about with either of those situations. But kind of the displacement of only one of them being in, whether it was just like me subconsciously then focusing on the bigs more, or it just kind of felt like it.
Well, sure. Like, I mean, because we hadn't seen them play that much, and we've always wondered too, like, at the end of the season, Finch Connolly said, like, we have enough of a body of work to know this can work. And I think some of us were a little skeptical about that. It's like, do you? Like, is 20-ish games enough to know that this is going to work? And
I mean, Chris, how many times did you have somebody, you're just talking to somebody with the Wolves, cite that 3-4 game stretch of like, oh, that West Coast
That
road
was
trip.
yeah.
And it got
We
to the
do
point.
we do it a lot too, by the way.
Well,
It's not
no,
just
no,
yeah.
no, we did. And I'm
Yeah.
saying, like, I kind of got to the point of rolling my eyes at that, or just being like, okay, guys, come on, it's 3 games. Like, let's see. And I'll, like, at least for right now, kind of cop to that does seem to be, that's what this looks like now. So
Yeah.
I can't roll my eyes to the same extent that is now that we're seeing it again for the first time, and you have Nas back, like you have the whole group back. And I think the Nas part of it, and having all 3 of them, that helps me kind of like try and understand. Like I was curious to see like what it looks like. Like, does Nas only play power forward now? Like who's Cat playing the most with between Rudy and, there wasn't lineup data on there, but I did it by hand. And so this might not be exactly right, but it was Cat and Rudy in the 2 games.
Yeah.
They played 23 minutes together. Nas and Rudy played 13 and a half minutes together. Nas and Cat only 4. I thought that was noteworthy. Like,
okay, yeah.
Didn't have much of that. Nas played 15 minutes at center by himself. Now, 7 minutes of that was in the second half.
Second half, right.
But remember, we were talking a little bit about like, is Nas going to play any 5? Like, I think
listen. I mean, in that second half of game 2, when it was just Nas out there at center, he looked really good. He looked really good. He was the best player on the floor for that 5-minute stretch or whatever that was.
And we say all the time, like, oh, Cat moving to the 4, he loses some of his advantage against 5s and being able to take him off the dribble. That's true for Nas too.
It's true for Nas as well.
So it's like, to if you can find it in the rotation, as they did in a preseason rotation in these first 2 games, I think that like makes sense to play some Nas at the 5 if you can still find obviously enough minutes for Rudy and Cat to play too. But I think all of the things are going to happen. You're going to get Cat and Rudy minutes. You're going to get Nas and Rudy minutes. You're going to get Nas and Cat minutes. You're going to get Nas solo minutes. Cat had 8.5 minutes solo at center, and Rudy only 3.5 minutes solo at center, which I thought was interesting. We saw a ton of like Rudy solo would have been Rudy and Kyle. Now the Rudy minutes with Kyle are in these preseason games have all been with Kyle at the 3. So I don't know. I mean, not to over like search for clues here in Abu Dhabi, but that I take something from that, in that I think nobody's job has really changed, and they're like, we're getting rid of this, we're never playing so-and-so together, or we're never only playing, like, I think they're gonna play all of it. I don't think it's just like a test for the preseason. I think in game 1 you will get minutes of every iteration of the big man group, because they rotate things so weird. It's like sometimes like Rudy Gobert will check into the game and it'll be for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Right. You're like, what?
Then that lasts for like 2 minutes, and then another stuff comes in, and yeah.
Which is just like, and I know this is like super in the weeds stuff, but I think these type of weeds matter when you're trying to navigate an inherently sort of funky big man conglomerate.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit more confidence in the idea that they're going to be able to get to that effectively this season, whatever the grouping might be.
I think it makes sense that, I mean, I don't know how the percentage is ultimately going to go Nas Cat versus Nas Rudy, Nas solo, whatever. I do think it just makes sense from if you just take a big picture view that Nas and Rudy are playing more than Nas and Cat are, because of both Nas and Cat being stronger offensively than they are defensively.
Sure.
So it just on paper just makes sense that you match up Nas and Rudy a little more.
And Finch has never wanted to play Nas with Cat.
Right.
I mean, he said it sometimes, but like we've always done that.
He was always a little reluctant. He was always a little reluctant to do that in the pre-Rudy era as well. But I mean, again, this just goes to show you where this team is now as opposed to last year. Last year we were asking, is Nas Reed just going to be sitting on the bench the entire
we were time? Answering, and the answer to that was yes.
The answer that was basically yes.
Yeah,
it's going to be hard for Nas to crack the rotation. Then of course we all saw what happened, and now it's like a given that Nas Reed contract extension, has to
He's
see the
playing.
floor. He's
Mm-hmm.
playing. They're going to make that work. Gotta just figure it out. It just goes to show you what a different place they are now as opposed to a year ago. That's what I come back to for this preseason. And I think it's the biggest thing is they're figuring less out. They've got Mike Conley in here at point guard. They've got their bench pretty much set. I mean, I don't think there's that much. It's just a matter of how deep does Finch want to go? Does he want to go 9? Does he want to go 10? 8? You know, what does he end up doing? But they have those guys pretty much lined up. Who's going to be what? Nickeil. I think one of the things that's a big takeaway too is Ant sits game 1, Jaden sits game 2. Who's your fifth starter? It's Nickeil in both instances.
Definitely noteworthy.
That's a noteworthy thing. It's not Kyle Anderson. It was Nickeil.
Yeah.
Whether that's because they want to, Nickeil's defense just fits better in the starting lineup, or they want to keep Kyle as kind of like a bit of a floor general for the second unit, maybe a little bit of both. But definitely a big takeaway is that Nickeil Alexander-Walker is held in very high esteem right now by this coaching staff, coming off of what he did last year and then building off of that with Canada over the summer.
I want to talk a little bit more about Nickeil, but Chris, let me first get to this. This coming Saturday, October 14th, Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis is going to be doing a Wolves Fest day where they want the brewery to kind of be a Wolves fan takeover. We kind of did this last season at this time. Hopefully this will be a little bit bigger, a little bit more space, a little bit more people. The Wolves' next preseason game is on Saturday night at 6:30. So if you missed the Abu Dhabi games over last weekend because they were day games, I think you have something to be excited about. It was a fun. I thought it was fun to actually watch this team play. I think it'd be more fun to do so, or I'm looking forward to doing it with a group of people. So we are going to watch that game at Falling Knife at 6:30 on Saturday night. Me and Britt are going to do a show at 5 before that, kind of leading us up into the game, and then come early, like 4:00. They want people to start coming through. It should be a fun day. We're going to do a bunch of giveaways and merch and tickets and all those sort of things. So again, I know I've been pumping this for the last few weeks, but we're excited about Wolves Fest at Falling Knife this Saturday. Chris, I did write down you were just kind of getting that, and I was reading your sort of takeaways piece from the first game, and I really think with this front office, this is what they're going to be best at. If we could just say over the next like 3-4 years, it's finding these guys on the margins. And I think just from sort of, talking to them or watching some of their moves, I think they prioritize and see the value in, particularly when you have an expensive team, can we find 1 or 2 or 3 rotation players who make less than $5 million or whatever to matter. And I think that's a super important skill set for this front office to actually have. They need to do this over the next few years. And I think Nickeil is such a strong example of that. Someone we know this front office scouted extensively back when he was coming out of the draft. Someone Finch obviously coached back in New Orleans, and is starting to feel like a really big win from a roster construction standpoint. That Nickeil is a guy that, knock on wood, Jaden or Ant need to like miss time at any point this season, or if, Kyle gets banged up, or even Mike, you play Nickeil, like having a bench player who I don't really have qualms with him needing to situationally be the fifth starter, because he's impactful on both ends. The defense is there. He got a Kyrie in the first game. He got a Luka in the second game because Jaden was out. He's a 3-point threat. I mean, this is just, I'm getting to the point of just being like, this is just a really good role player. Like, I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to matter on this team. Maybe, I don't want to say all the way in ways to the degree to which Kyle Anderson was such a boon off the bench for this team, but I'm kind of getting that feel like, and maybe it started obviously at the end of last season, but Nickeil Alexander-Walker looks today to me, and I'm honestly more so going off what I saw him do for Team Canada this summer, but he looks like such a better player than he was when he was traded for in those first 5-10 games he played, after the Wolves kind of took him off of
Yeah.
ice in Utah and started playing him. It took him a little while, but just the difference in the player he is from those first few games after the trade last year to what I'm seeing today, that is more than an underrated storyline, I think, with this team, not just for now, but kind of big picture going forward.
I'm with you. I thought, and you were clipping some of his stuff from Canada and the early preseason game, especially as it relates to his 3-point shooting. Game 2, especially, I thought he's letting it rip.
Yeah,
he's confident, and if he can hit it at a clip similar to last year, that's huge, absolutely huge for this team. He to me is like kind of an example of like what can go wrong in the NBA and then what can go right for guys who are kind of on the fringe of the league, right? It's like he's first round pick, tossed around, traded different places. He's the kind of guy who's like, he's not lacking for talent. He's not lacking for, the drive, the hustle. You see how hard he plays.
Yeah.
It's all about finding a right fit and a right situation for that guy. And, a lot of times that's out of players' control. But to your point, the front office sees this guy and sees, okay, plays hard. We like that.
Right.
Lengthy helps, can shoot the 3 decently well. Can play and guard multiple positions.
Versatile, right?
Versatile, seemingly a good teammate. Like we know that matters to this front office as well. Right. So he checks all those boxes for them, and they bring him in. Like you said, clunky at first, a little awkward, but finds his role, finds his niche, plays fast. The way Finch wants to play offensively. Like he will make quick decisions, doesn't hold the ball. And again, just defensively, just another plus defender, great asset on that end of the floor. So like you said, I think they are good at kind of defining some of these characteristics and qualities of what they're looking for on these margin guys. It's like, if we stick to this set of criteria, we think we have a good idea of what will work. Now, it's not always going to, not everybody's going to pan out, but if we stick to this, these kind of tent poles of what we want to do and what we want to be as a team and an organization, probably more often than not, you're going to hit on that type of player. And they seem to have hit one here. As for the cost, we see this is, or at least people are kind of predicting this is where the league is headed in terms of the cost of players with the new second apron. Like the consensus is like, okay, the top is going to keep rising, but the middle class is going to bottom out. So you're going to see these guys, going for this kind of money, less than $10 million.
There's going to be value in that.
There's going to be value here, and it's all about picking those right guys, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be tons of them out there that'll be making kind of in the same salary range.
Well, you just have Nickeil and Shake and Troy Brown Jr.
Right.
I think they're all making like $4.5, $5 million.
They're all making right around the same money. Yeah, exactly.
To your point, kind of like the guy, like that class of not a minimum player,
right?
But also maybe like not a starter level pay. Less than like those are getting pinched down, and I think those 3 in particular. Even Troy Brown, like I'd say, he was intriguing enough to me in these first 2 preseason games, and just kind of how, honestly, the biggest, what I just now say Troy Brown, like the first thing that goes in my mind is like they're playing him at like the 2, and he's like 6'7". They had I tweeted this out a couple times, but they played a lineup in both games for extended chunks where it was Shake Milton at the 1, who's 6'6", Troy Brown Jr. at the 2, who's 6'7", Kyle Anderson at the 3, who's 6'9", Nas at the 4, who's 6'10", and then Rudy, who's 7'1". And when I was writing that down, I was wondering, like maybe that's where Nickeil actually fits in here, maybe to the Troy Brown spot, because he played so many of his minutes in these first 2 games with the starters, right? Because he started both of the games, but that's probably right. Like when we picture Nickeil in the mix here, it's maybe Troy Brown out, and it's like him, Shake, Kyle, Nas, maybe Rudy or Cat as the 5 with that group. That's probably where Nickeil fits into this, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And listen, injuries are going to happen, and so this is all going to get jumbled up, anyway. But yeah, I would agree that that's probably his slot. And again, we'll also see how deep Finch wants to really go with the rotation.
His best games are Nickeil's best games, if we include these two in it too, have been when he's played with the starters a lot, right? Like that was the play-in and the playoffs. He was playing with that group. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try and target that. And maybe Kyle Anderson is the 6th man, but maybe Nickeil's like the first guy in, sort of that sort of thing. That just makes sense in my head.
If and when Jaden gets in foul trouble, early on in a game, Nickeil's probably the guy that comes right in for him. You know, Jaden picks up 2 early in the first quarter. You're probably going to see Nickeil be that guy that comes off the bench and take over.
And alongside, like that's the thing is I don't really have a role in my head with Nickeil Alexander-Walker where I go, I don't know if he should be playing with that guy or with that group or whatever. He feels like the most malleable guy on this team getting minutes because he just has sort of that same role no matter who he's out there with. He's sprinting to the corner, pretty much plays out of there the whole time, which is getting him his threes. And then a lot of his effort is on the defensive end, whether it's chasing Kyrie at the point guard or, giving Jaden some reps off on the big 2-guard 3. Like they're going to have him guard the same type of players, I think, as Jaden will. And you can throw Ant in the mix there well too. Like this isn't a new thought. We've talked about this plenty, but just the idea that throwing Nickeil into the mix allows you to sort of diversify the ways in which you use Jaden, how often you have to use Ant on the ball, because, Ant can do that. He does probably not for a full game. You also don't mind if you can get away with it, getting Ant to use 70% of his effort on offense, 30% of his effort on defense. You know what I mean?
Right.
And Nickeil just seems to crack that so well. And then, Shake is newer to us, but he seems to be in that same vein as well. Any quick Shake thoughts?
With Shake, I was kind of just thinking about Shake and how he fits into the overall kind of archetype of what Finch is kind of looking for out of the point guard position. And comparing to kind of what we were thinking about Mike Conley, it's like, okay, Mike Conley gets here last year. They tell him immediately, like, you need to score more. We would like you to score more. Shake Milton gets here, and it's like, we want him to shoot more. We want him to score more. So it's starting to become a pattern, and maybe this is why, maybe Jordan McLaughlin has kind of fallen down the pecking order a little bit over the years.
Thought he looked decent in the second game.
I thought. Now, to be fair to Jordan, he
I knew that's not what you were saying, but
he looked very good, and the injury obviously had a big part of how he played last year. But they want these guys to score more because they are so movement heavy. Make the right decision, and
it needs to be a threat.
Right, it needs to be a threat because that frees up the offense. And if the right play is for you to shoot it or score, you need to be able to do that. Which is, Jordan McLaughlin hasn't always been the strongest scorer.
He's more get offense going for others guy.
Yes, and that's great for what Finch likes to do as well. But I think as we're seeing with how they want to play now, especially if you're going to have Rudy on the floor, who isn't a huge offensive threat, the point guard needs to be a threat offensively. Because if you have 2 guys who are kind of non-factors shooting wise or scoring wise out there, then the defense can just load up on the other 3 and cause things. So I think Shake makes sense with how this team wants to play, especially if Rudy Gobert is playing 35-ish minutes a night. the fact that you need somebody who is not just a point guard, but is actually who could shoot it and is a scoring threat. And so I think he fits that kind of profile of what they're looking for.
And you wrote about this, like he wasn't much of a volume 3-point shooter guy. I think that's probably the biggest shift they will try to enact in Shake's game is like, hey, like be willing to spot up a little bit more, like turn up that dial of 3-point volume. Because when I do sort of like to what you were just saying with if there's one or two non-shooters out there at a time or guys just not knocking them down, that's going to hurt this team whenever that happens. And there's like, I mean, Kyle Anderson and Jaden both shot like 40% from three last year, like 39% or something, right? And I think odds are that's not going to happen again this season.
Right.
I would take the under on 39% for both Jaden and Kyle this year. So if one of them is in a slump or one of them's just, gets a little reticent there, like you need to make, that is going to be really important for this group to make up for that shooting elsewhere. Carl's going to do it, right? Ant's going to do it, but the role players last year, Jaden shot the ball really well. Kyle shot the ball really well. Like you need that again. And if and when those guys aren't shooting well, again, this goes back to Nikhil and Shake. They kind of need them to be knockdown guys. So as I'm familiarizing myself with Shake here some, but that he's the creator, but he might need to be a shooter even more than anything else. I think with this group, or just be able to capably knock them down. Chris, weird training camp schedule this year, right? Where we have like a couple days of practice, then they leave for a week. We're not there to be peppering them with questions about what's going on. Like normally we have this whole like 7-8 days before they play a game or something.
And then we're all sick of seeing each other. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
1 week into the season. Yeah.
And it's like all these things we want to figure out. And then it just kind of gets figured out by the game. And so that's what's happened here is we've now seen this team play twice without us having spent very much time around the team, but still we've seen them twice. What are we now this week, right? They're going to have a week of practice before they go to New York next weekend. Like, what are we trying to figure out this week about this team? What are we going to be asking Finch and the players about this week?
Good question. I guess for me,
I don't have a lot. Like
I don't have a lot right now. I hit a point every preseason. It seems to come sooner and sooner every preseason where I'm like, let's get to the regular season and start playing some games already. I think I hit that point after day 2 this year, which means after media day next year, I'll be ready to just roll the ball out and let's play some games that count.
Right.
Well, I mean, the big questions with this team, I think, are still the big questions. And we won't have answers for them until the regular season happens, which is, is this team going to shake off its maturity issues next year, which we talked about last time? Rebounding. Is rebounding going to be fundamentally different this year? The preseason is not a good indicator for how this team is going. Those 2 games, I take nothing away from how they rebounded in that game or in those 2 games. So I want to see it in the regular season. Is this team going to be a better rebounding team, or is that also?
Can I just say I kind of feel that way about the defense too?
Do you? Okay.
Like I don't know. And I think I've up and down praised the offense and how it looked or everything. Yeah. I felt when we talked to Finch, he was also very praising of the defense. I thought that was kind of interesting because I don't know. It felt more to me like they killed Dallas both times in the first half, right? Like I felt that was more about the Wolves finding offense and Dallas not finding any offense other than Luka. Like I don't know. Maybe I need to go back.
I think that's fair.
I didn't feel like the defense is solved by any means. But let's also go. This was a top 10 defense last season and a bottom 10 offensive team. So if I could choose one to be good to start the year, I'd take the offense. Right, that's where you need the most growth. But rebound. You were saying rebounding. Yeah. Those issues on the defensive rebounding, how they're going to play in coverage, how they're going to navigate some of those matchups. Like, I don't know that. I guess
we still need to see that.
Yeah, we need to see that. I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
how much we're gonna be able to figure that out,
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
the preseason. Ask some questions and
I did.
yeah, what it is that Finch thought was so great about the defense.
I did notice there was one. I mean, it's very anecdotal because it was just one moment, but one of my biggest pet peeves with this team the last couple of years was their propensity to not rebound free throws at just like
So bad.
the absolute worst moments sometimes.
Yeah.
And there was, I remember watching, there was a moment in game two, the first half of game two, free throw miss by Dallas. And it was a long rebound that got kicked around. And just in my head, I'm thinking like, oh, here it comes. Here comes the three off the free throw miss, that they should have secured. But Mike Conley came in to save the day.
There we go.
I'm like, there's a little bit of a difference this year. Like Mike Conley came in, swooped in front of a guy, and went and got the rebounds. And you didn't think twice about it because that's what happened. But
I do think
I was noticing that little thing that he might add and might save them from a couple embarrassing moments this year, just because he might be in the right position.
They've better rebounding personnel as guards or wings this year than they did at the start of last season. I mean, Mike Conley is an upgrade over D'Angelo Russell in that way. I think Nikhil's oftentimes going to be guarding the ball, so he's not going to be in rebounding position all that often. But like I trust his like willingness to work there, right, and fight, kind of like bounce back down into the lane to go get it. And then also, I wrote this down during the game. Troy Brown, I thought, was like rebounding, and I thought about that in the sense of, and I had no idea like what caliber of rebounder he was, right? But because we saw that so many times, like long miss, the other team gets the offensive rebound, and how many times that went over Bryn Forbes' hands or Torian Prince's or D'Angelo Russell, a lot of these guys who weren't on the team. Like Troy Brown, I saw like go in, snatch it. I know in the first game he had 7 rebounds. I don't know if this is the second game here. He had 3. But I looked it up and I looked at his like defensive rebounding rate, right? The percentage of defensive rebounds he gets when he's on the floor. And it was like 17%, which doesn't really mean anything. But I looked that up in the context of wings, and that's like 95th percentile. So that's his career before. So I didn't know Troy Brown has historically been a good defensive rebounder. And to the defense, I think we probably did last season go so much of like, toggle, right? They're up in coverage, they're back in coverage. Well, so much of that shit would have just been resolved if they would have just grabbed more rebounds,
Right.
Like that's we overcomplicate it sometimes.
I totally agree. That to me has always been the biggest problem with them on defense is they get in half court defense, they'll play any coverage decently well. They just can't end enough possessions.
Yes.
And in especially in that Memphis series from 2 years ago, as we know, which is one of the reasons why they went out and got Rudy in the first place, was because he was going to help solve their rebounding issues, which did not happen.
That's a perfect example of
happen.
The rebounding issues were not, in fact, all on the bigs back
exactly.
ago.
And we saw that the same issues still popped up last year. It's like,
because it was the guards.
It's the long rebounds that kill you. And
this seems super in the weeds, but again, they were 2 seasons ago last in defensive rebounding, and then last season I believe they're
26th
worst. 26th,
something like that. Yeah.
So these are important things when you're trying.
That is their biggest Achilles heel on defense right now. They have the personnel to play really good defense. Not very few teams in the league are going to be able to match what the Timberwolves can trot out in a half-court defensive setting this year.
Right.
I can't really think of a team that you would take if you have one half-court possession that you need to come up with a stop. Minnesota's got to be up there in terms of teams that you would roll out
has to be
for that one stop. But can you then get the rebound if you force the miss? Is the biggest issue with this team, and that's something that we've already asked Finch about it already. We've asked him ad nauseum the last 2 seasons about it, because it's not exactly been a secret with this team.
Right.
But that's on, and I think that's one of the biggest growth areas for Ant. Quite honestly,
Totally.
that's on him, especially if he's not going to be playing another team's top scorer and they're saving him for offense, or Jaden's got him, or Nikhil's got him. The one area where Ant probably has to really pick it up is, okay, Ant, you're not guarding the other team's best scorer, but get in there and rebound. You're physical. You're big. Like, you've got size. You're an athlete. You can jump. Get in there and get 6 boards a night, 7 boards a night instead of 3.
Look, we should talk about Ant a little bit because we couldn't talk about him after the first game.
Right.
He did play. I just think he's going to be an incredible isolation scorer this season. But I think in ways that has some conflict to it, right? With the idea of the wanting to have more of a structured offense or wanting to move the ball and those sort of things. Like, Ant has an elite skill set of not needing structure or flow to be able to get buckets, right?
Yeah.
And how does he, for the betterment of the group, kind of breathe air into structure or breathe air into ball movement for this group? And what I wrote down was, rewatching the possessions this morning, was it felt like, in football where they do like the offense, like the first 10 plays of the game are like scripted, right? They say that.
Yeah.
I kind of had like that vibe to it, where the first quarter, like the first 6 minutes, it was really, they were just running those decisive actions that you were talking about earlier. And as it went on, I think it became a little bit more Ant-centric, which then made it more Ant-centric, right? So there's a little bit less of that script to it. And that's part of the balance of that. I don't even say that to be one great thing or the other. The last possession of the first quarter where Ant hits a buzzer beater is a perfect example of that. He was like 14 seconds
Everybody
left.
get out of the way.
Get the hell out of here. I'm scoring. And he did. And he did.
Did.
So,
but he took a very difficult fadeaway jumper. Like, it looked great, and it was one of the highlight plays of the thing. But to me, that was almost emblematic of like what they should not be doing.
Yeah, and I mean,
listen, it's the first quarter of a preseason game.
Yeah,
right. And if it's the fourth quarter,
right? It's both, right? It's both. You need to give. I think you need to give Ant some freedom to be great, and with some of that comes like just willing to have that will to just score. Sometimes, like that happens when you have a great perimeter creator on your team. Sometimes you have to let that happen, but it can't be all that. It can't be takeover mode. Why I thought it was cool in the second game is it's like, all right, I got Rudy going a few times right away in the first quarter. He has or the first half, like that big dunk. They find him under the basket a couple times. He hit that little push shot from J-Mac, found him. I was like, okay, I'm tweeting that out. Like Rudy catching it at like 8 feet away from the basket.
Continues,
Yes, push shot. I need it. But you know what I mean? Like if you can do that where there's some of that structure, everyone's kind of getting a touch, a bucket, Carl hitting that first corner 3. If you can get some of that stuff first, and then the Ant kind of like that's the best first quarter. Best way to start a half, I think, is some scripted buckets. Cat gets a couple, Rudy gets one, maybe Jaden or Nikhil hit a corner 3. And then at the end of the quarter, once guys start subbing out, all right, Ant, it's a little bit more self-creation, go get yours. But broadly, I think they did a good job of finding all of that. I think Dallas helped them a lot by just being bad defensively. They didn't have a lot of matchups. I mean, Luka was guarding Cat in the first game. Like, that shouldn't do that. I think some things empowered the offense a little bit that were lucky, but that's what they're going to be figuring out, right? Is whatever that balance is from running the offense with structure to get everyone involved, plus letting Ant get his. We only saw like 2 quarters of Ant, right? And it wasn't
right.
a ton, but we should note that he was back and that it was both. Rudy got his, Carl got his, and Ant got his in the first half of that second game, and that's a pretty good place to start.
It was, and to your point, like Ant definitely had the freedom in transition when he kind of could see things happening, kind of like that's like the semi-transition possessions where he's pushing it. They're not.
Go ahead.
Defense isn't quite said just go ahead and make stuff happen. Go try and get fouled, which he did, I think, a couple different times, which is big for him to get the foul rate up.
Yeah, I didn't. How many free throws did he shoot? 4. Yeah, he shot 4 in the first half.
So that's huge for him as well. And you can see that he's got the freedom in those moments, and those should be the moments.
Oh yeah,
where he's attacking. Like
him and Jaden, man. Like if you can go, that's you want to shoot more. Both of you guys get it in transition, semi-transition. By all means, run. Yeah, I'm with you there for sure.
Yeah, that those were some of the, I think, the best decisions and strongest things that Ant did in the limited time he played in game 2. I'm just, another thing that I will harp on, I think fans will harp on, is what does the late game offense look like this year? Are they going to learn from last year, or is it going to devolve again into what we saw at the end of that first quarter, which is everybody out of the way, ISO, dribble, no movement, no nothing, difficult shot. It goes in that time, but those kind of possessions over the long haul can be frustrating.
Yeah, particularly late game. That's a good point. And that last possession is a perfect example of it. Like I think he had Maxi Kleba on him. Like that's probably not what it's normally going to look like. They're gonna, if that final possession of the first quarter was the fourth quarter, like they're not. They're going to be intentional. They're calling a timeout and they'll be like, no, so and so is.
So we're going to set this up. Yeah, we're going to set this up. We're going to do this, and then we're going to move. Yeah.
And then what does Ant do, or does Ant recognize that and then penetrate and kick?
It's also like I mean, what happens after the action is done, right?
Yeah.
So you run your action to get kind of set up in it. We've seen them run that horns action so much since Finch has been here. But it's like after you've done that, now what are you doing?
They cut it off. If they stop it,
right. And then is it just Ant just pulls it out and we're back in ISO ball again, or do you keep moving off of that? Do you find a way to have a secondary action off of that, or something else on the back end? How is that different this year? I guess, to your earlier point, what are we going to ask? I guess that's something that I'll be asking is like, what does late game offense now look like? And how is that different from what you were doing?
And the answer probably is there's no one right answer. Right. But not only choosing one answer. I think that's, if I get how Finch thinks about it, I think that would probably be it. All right, Chris. Well, I'm with you. We need actual basketball games here soon.
But we will still provide content for the next 2 weeks here. Yes.
Check out Chris's stuff over at the StarTribune. He interviewed Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum. Is that his right title?
Yeah.
Just about the Abu Dhabi games. I found that actually interesting that the NBA pays for all of that. I'm watching these games and I'm seeing all our the in arena people from Target Center or in the arena in Abu Dhabi. I'm like, wow, there are a lot of Minnesota people here at this game in the Middle East. So that stuff was interesting. So I'd suggest people going over to check that out over at the StarTribune. I'm sure Chris will, in addition to daily coverage, have some features here throughout the preseason as well. Chris, appreciate you doing it. We'll talk again in a week, and they will have played one more preseason
game. That's right.
All right. Stuff. All right. He's Christopher Hine. Follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine, and I will be back some point on Tuesday to preview the wings position with Britt Robson. Until then, with Britt, he's Chris. I'm Dane. Peace out. How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.